Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second AYO applications webinar. Thanks so much to all of you for tuning in from home this evening. So my name is Eliza and I'm the Artistic Administrator here at the AYO. Tonight's webinar is a chance to hear all about the AYO auditions process and to get some expert advice on how you can prepare yourself effectively and achieve the best result you can in your upcoming audition. So I'm very lucky to be joined this evening by three experienced professional musicians and auditions panellists. We have Molly Kadarauch representing strings, Chris Tingay representing winds, and Tim White representing percussion and timpani. Now, Molly, Chris and Tim have all sat on the AYO audition panel more than once. In fact, they were all involved in the assessment of last year's audition, so they are very well placed to guide you through this process. So thank you to everyone who sent in your questions ahead of this evening. We will try to include as many as we can in the discussion tonight. If you think of something during the webinar that you'd like to ask our panel, please feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A function if you're watching via Zoom, or in the comment section if you're streaming on Facebook. We will do our best to answer as many of those questions as we can, and any that we don't answer, AYO will respond to via email after the webinar. So please include your email address along with your question. So before we launch into the questions on the auditions process, let's begin by just getting to know each of our panelists a little bit. So panel, perhaps each of you could start by telling our audience a bit about yourself. So who you are, your background, and what your connection with AYO is. So let's hear from Molly first, and then Chris, and then Tim. So over to Molly to start with.
Thanks, Eliza. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here tonight. Hope everyone's doing well in lockdown, if they are in lockdown. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm actually not originally from Australia. I grew up in the United States and also in England. So unfortunately, I was not in the position to be, I'm not part of the AYO alumni. I never got to go to AYO as a youth. But I do work for them as a panelist and also as a tutor in some of their programs. So I did have the opportunity to go to several youth orchestra programs when I was younger, and I would say that it was probably one of the best things that you could possibly try to do if you're young and up-and-coming orchestra player, and that it's a wonderful way to meet friends, and you know, even if you don't end up becoming a professional musician, it's just a fantastic opportunity to do. So anyway, go AYO. A little bit more of my background. So I moved to Australia in 1996 to join the Australian Chamber Orchestra, where I was a core member there for 8 years, toured around internationally and nationally, and then decided to leave and move down to Melbourne, where I am now. And I've had a very active freelancing career with various orchestras all around nationally, including MSO and the opera here, and also as a teacher at the Melbourne Conservatorium of Music, Monash, also Queensland Conservatorium and ANAM as well. So yeah, that's sort of my basic background. I also play lots of chamber music in Sutherland Trio and with others as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly. I also am not born in Australia.
I
hope you are, Tim. I was born in the UK, but my family moved to Western Australia when I was 6 years old. So I grew up in Perth, one of the places that's not in lockdown. Lucky people. Yes. So yeah, I went to Churchland Senior High School there, which is one of the big music schools. And when I finished year 12 there, I moved to Canberra and studied at the Canberra School of Music, which was just the best place. I loved studying there. Alan Vivian was my teacher. Did my degree, little bit of sort of bits and pieces of studying overseas, but nothing major. And then moved to Sydney in a couple of years after I finished in Canberra. And I was very fortunate that a job came up in the SSO. Anne Menzies, who'd been the long-time second clarinet of the orchestra, retired. She was the wife of Donald Hazelwood, the concertmaster of the orchestra, and I was very fortunate to get her job. And that was nearly 29 years ago, and I am still the second clarinet in the SSO. I also do a little bit of teaching and chamber music and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, most of my time has been in the Opera House when it's not a building site, and playing with the SSO. My association with music camp started or AYO started, well, such a long time ago. It was actually last millennium, 1986 was my first music camp at St. Peter's in Adelaide. And I was so taken with camp. It was probably the best 2 weeks of my life, that camp. And it was like a legal drug. I was hooked on it so much that I came back to do 5 music camps as a student. I did AYO for 3 years. I toured in '91 to America and South America with the AYO Camerata. We played at I think it was the centenary celebrations of Carnegie Hall on that trip. And the year after, I was lucky enough to go and play with a group called the Jeunesse Musicale World Orchestra, which was one of the things that AYO used to do. They used to send a couple of people every year to go and play with that group. So I had a fantastic experience as a student through AYO, and I very definitely credit the career I've had in a great way to what I learned in the orchestras along the way at music camp and later in AYO. In more recent times, this millennia, I've been very fortunate to have been asked back to tutor at camp, and I've now done 6 camps as a tutor, which I just love. It's still the best 2 weeks fun you can have in your year. And have now done, I think 3 years worth of auditions, a couple where we were live traveling around the country, and this last year when we had to reinvent ourselves and start doing Zoom auditions, which is, a very interesting change that was forced upon us. But I think even post-COVID, I think a lot of orchestras are going to adopt the recorded way of doing auditions, if not for the whole process, but certainly for first rounds of auditions, for professional auditions, and then there'll be shortlisting by that way, and there'll be a lot less travel that way. It's probably a lot more environmentally friendly. So that's me, basically. Tim?
Well, my journey was the opposite to Chris. I was born in Canberra and moved to Perth. So I'm living in Perth. Came over, first of all, I'm a percussionist. First of all, to play with the WASO. I was there for 28 years, and I now have the joy of being head of classical music at WAPA, West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, where I work with students to create careers for them and make beautiful things on the stage and have the best time ever. It's kind of like a little bit of a rolling low-level music camp through the whole year. Went to 6 music camps as a student, and my first one totally changed my life. I met other percussionists, for the first time. I was terrified and excited to the score of 11 on both scales, but I came back thinking that's what I want to do. And I went to 6 camps as a student, and I think I've tutored at 5 or 6 camps and went on the 1984 European tour, and it's been an immensely important part of my life and an inspiration. And I love seeing students now go to music camp and come back with their eyes like dinner plates and the fire of inspiration burning inside them. It's wonderful to see and to share.
Great. Thank you so much for those introductions, panel, and thanks so much for being with us tonight. It's really wonderful to have you here. So let's get stuck into some questions from our community now. I thought we could start with a few of the more general questions to provide an overview of the audition requirements and of AYO's auditions process. Then we can break things down a little bit further to talk about the different elements of the audition and to get some tips on preparing. So Molly, to kick us off, maybe you could give us just a quick overview of what the aspects of the AYO audition are that everyone needs to prepare.
Yeah, so for the audition, you need to prepare one piece, which is a solo work or presented as a solo work, plus 4 to 6 excerpts from standard orchestral repertoire, mostly standard orchestral repertoire. And the solo excerpt can be anything really that, you could choose a movement from a concerto or a movement from a sonata or just a standalone piece. The 4 to 6 excerpts depend on which programs you're going for. So if you're in the younger group, probably you would just be preparing 4 excerpts. And if you're going for the more advanced programs, you'd be preparing the 6, which are also not only aimed at orchestral repertoire, but also sometimes chamber music as well. There's a big chamber music aspect to all of the programs.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thanks, Molly. And we'll go into some more detail on both of those aspects a bit later on in the webinar. So now, Tim, requirements for percussion are just a little bit different. Could you explain how the percussion auditions are different?
Yes, indeed. That's because we have so many instruments to cover. I always think, well, what's a percussion? So there's no own choice work. We don't have enough time to fit that in. And you're working on 6 different instruments: timpani, snare drum, xylophone, glockenspiel, tambourine, and cymbals. And one of the big challenges there is fitting them all into the one video frame and making sure you get a good sound and a good vision across all dynamics and all the instruments. So there's some kind of logistical challenges. And in the lockdown, also just getting access to your 6 instruments could be a bit of a challenge.
Thanks, Tim. So Chris, could you explain what it means to audition on an auxiliary wind instrument, and what material do you need to prepare to be considered on one of those instruments?
Yep, sure. Thanks, Eliza. So the auxiliary instruments are the piccolo, corongle, E-flat and bass clarinet, and contrabassoon. And if you want to do those instruments as well as flute, clarinet, oboe, bassoon, you'll be given 3 extra excerpts, orchestral excerpts, to prepare. You don't need to do an own choice piece on the extra instruments. It's just the 3 excerpts. I think it's a terrific thing to do, to actually to do the extra instruments, even though with the clarinet, because we have 2 of them, we have the E-flat and the bass, means your audition recording goes on for quite a long time. But it's a really, really useful skill to be able to play the other instruments that makes you far more employable later on down the track. If you can play the piccolo or the corongle to a really high standard, they're very specialist instruments. And it's a really good way of getting a foot in a door if you've got skills in those departments. Just one little thing, don't do what I did when I was a student, which was pick up a bass clarinet for the first time 2 days before the audition and squeak and squawk my way through the thing. And the same with an E-flat clarinet, which was horrifically out of tune because I had no idea how to blow one. They are very specialist instruments, and you do blow them, and well, the fingering's usually very similar, but you blow them quite differently on all the wind instruments. And so you really need to be having some sort of level of proficiency, which comes about from having access to an instrument for 6 months or a year before you want to go out in public and let someone hear it. So if you're at a school or university and you have opportunity to borrow those instruments, borrow them. You can play your Mozart concerto on the E-flat clarinet or the bass clarinet or the corongle. It doesn't matter. Still sounds quite funny, but it's a great way of learning to play the thing in tune and to blow it and to work out how to get around it. And then I encourage you to do the extra excerpts, and yeah, it opens doors.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. So the next question is a good one. It's what makes a strong AYO audition? So I think it would be really helpful to hear from each of you on this to get the perspectives from the different instrumental groups. So maybe Molly first, then Chris, then Tim. Could you talk to us about some of the qualities that you recognise in a strong audition?
Well, I think there are many qualities that make a strong audition, but I think in particular for string players, you need to really aim for good intonation, having a solid intonation in your sound, strong rhythm, so a good rhythmic pulse, and also a nice sound. But also on top of that, it's very important, especially in the excerpts, to have clear dynamics and articulation, plus whatever musicality and phrasing you have to offer. But I think even more important than all those things is the fact that you want to show the panel that you want to be there and that you want to do a good job, and you need to put in enough preparation and enough time beforehand in order to do that, and to put your best foot forward and to show us that you really want to go for it and do the best job that you can do. But yeah, all those aspects are very important for string players, and I'm sure for other instruments as well. Chris?
Yeah, I think probably regardless of the instrument, I think what you're trying to demonstrate to us and what we're looking for when we're sitting on a panel is, are you the sort of person that I can drop into a wind section or a brass section or a symphony orchestra and know that you are going to contribute and it's not going to be a disaster? So one of the most important things that you must show us is that you have listened to the piece, you know how the piece goes, and you know the function of your part within the greater whole. So the excerpts you're given, a lot of them are solos for specific instruments from within the symphonies or the concertos, but often they're not. They're a secondary part or they're a difficult rhythmic part. And it's very important that you can convey to us that you understand how the piece is supposed to fit together, because that's what you're going to have to do when you get into the orchestra. The conductor wants you to be able to play your part as a secondary part or a rhythmic supporting part or as a solo. And it's very important that you understand that. Now, that comes from studying the scores, listening to lots of different recordings, never always the same recording. Listen to different versions of the same piece from different stages in history. And for me then, the other thing, of course, is please do the basics. Play what is on the page in front of you. It's incredible how many times you hear something that is the same phrase twice and it goes piano to forte, and people will come and play it exactly the same twice. So do play what's on the page in front of you. Dynamics, articulations, be as rhythmically and as intonation accurate as you possibly can. I think what Molly said about those is it goes for any instrument, as accurate as you possibly can. And the other thing I think probably that I'm looking for is someone who's stylistically aware and correct. So you're not playing a Mozart symphony as though it's a piece of Rachmaninoff, and don't pull Mozart around all over the place. If it's Haydn, you're going to play it differently to how you're going to play Stravinsky, that sort of thing. So be aware of where the piece comes from, what it was written for, what stylistic period and what stylistic characteristics. Play the dots on the page, and show us that you know how this fits in the bigger whole. Tim.
Marvellous. I think we're all going to say the similar things, but in different ways or different words. So there's a whole lot of things that you'll be working on, either with your teacher or yourself, to get right, kind of measurable things almost. Are you playing the piece or the excerpts at the right tempo, with the right rhythm? Are the notes correct? Are the dynamics vivid and right? Is your sound quality good? Is it articulated well? Is it consistent? Is the tuning good? And they're all measurable things that I'm sure students work on in detail with their teachers. But then there's these intangible things that just glow to panelists and what they love hearing. A player who plays with conviction and authority. They really, it's like a magnet somehow, but how do you measure that? Conviction and authority with rhythmic security, so you know the beat is strong inside the player. Do they play it with a sense of style and character and flair that radiates from the music? Do they do a good job of creating a mood or an atmosphere, bringing the music to life? And then the holy grail of auditions is the panelists sitting there hearing one instrument, whether it's a triangle or a clarinet or a cello, but somehow they hear in their head the whole orchestra. And if you can play your instrument in a way that's so convincing that the panel hears the whole orchestra at the same time, you have got it. And they'll think, that's right. That's what we want.
Awesome. Thanks for those great answers, everyone. So we have had a few questions on AYO's assessment process and fairness come through in the past few weeks. So I will just spend a couple of minutes addressing some of those ones now. So the first question is, who assesses my audition? So AYO engage professional orchestral musicians who have experience as auditioners to do our assessment. This year we have 18 assessors in total, so you can find their names listed on the AYO website. And these individuals each form panels of 2, so every single audition will be assessed by 2 people. There may occasionally be a case where one of our panellists has a teacher-student relationship with an applicant, and where that's the case, that panelist won't have access to that particular audition video, so no applicant will ever be assessed by their teacher. And there is a specialist for every instrument on each panel of 2 as well. So for example, if you're auditioning on the flute, then your audition will be assessed by at least one flautist, and the same goes for every single instrument. So another question was, can I have feedback after my audition is assessed? So just due to the high number of applications that AYO receive, we aren't able to provide individual feedback to applicants this year, unfortunately. Do existing AYO members get preference over people auditioning for the first time? So no, they don't get preference. If you win a place on a program, then that's for 1 year. And then everyone auditions again annually, including people who have been successful for 3 to 5 years. They still re-audition each year. So the panel will only take into account what you have presented in this audition. So if this is the first year that you are auditioning, then you have just as much chance to get in as everybody else does. And every year we have many people joining the programs for the first time. So the last question I'll answer before we get back to hearing from the experts. is, are you able to provide some rough numbers on how many people apply each year and how many get in? So AYO get around 1,000 applications most years. There are roughly 500 places available each year. Sometimes people do more than one program, so a few of those places could go to one individual. And there are roughly 100 to 150 new participants in our programs each year. So whilst the programs are competitive, there's quite a bit of opportunity available there. All right, so now we're going to shift our focus to answering some questions on preparing the two aspects of the audition that Molly talked about earlier on, which are the own choice piece and the excerpts. So this first question, I think, again, would be good to hear from all three of our panelists on, and that is, can you offer some advice on selecting an own choice piece? So what purpose does it serve in the audition, and what is the panel listening for? So who wants to answer that one first?
Sure, I can go first if that's okay. So for the solo piece, I think that well, you need to talk to your teacher, definitely, in determining what you should play. But also you should think about what your strong attributes are as a player, and you should really try to put your best foot forward with your solo piece and kind of view it as like it's your calling card as to sort of the type of player you are, who you are. Yeah, it sort of shows a snapshot to the panel of sort of what type of player you are and you know, what you can do on your instrument. So that's how you should select your solo piece, I think, based on that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think we're all going to answer the same thing here again. So playing to your strengths, I think, is important. The purpose of the own choice piece, as distinct from the excerpts, I think, is to show us that something extra, something that attracts our attention. So if you've got you know, a stunning technique, or you've got an amazing sound, or you're incredibly musical, then you want to pick something that plays to your strengths, to show us that little bit of something extra. I mean, we're using the excerpts to assess how you can sort of be put into a team, whereas your own choice piece is your opportunity to show us something special about you. And I know I've used the own choice piece to consider whether some applicants are suitable to sit within a section, or whether to be considered for a principal position in a section if they've got that little something special. So yeah, I think it's the sort of icing on the cake, and to attract our attention and just lift you out of a group of people. Yeah. So play to your strengths is my advice.
And my chiming in would be, choose a piece that you can really bring to life, a piece that you love, a piece that you believe in, a piece that you can fill with energy and beauty and conviction. Don't just pick a tricky piece. Pick a piece that you can really bring to life.
Excellent. Thank you for those answers, everyone. So the next question is, should I avoid playing standard repertoire that is really popular and many others might also choose to do? Chris, maybe you could offer some advice on that one.
Look, I think the standard repertoire question comes back to, should I always play a Mozart concerto for my own choice piece, because that's what a professional orchestra usually asks you to do. And there's two ways of looking at it. Yes, you can learn an awful lot from listening to someone play Mozart to see whether it's really Mozart or whether you're playing it like Rachmaninoff. But I would tend to say, if you have something that is something you really enjoy playing, you are more likely to show those special something that we're looking for. And so it doesn't really matter whether it's your Mozart concerto or multiple Mozart concertos if you're lucky enough to have more than one, or it's something that was only written 2 years ago. That's very modern and very new. If you really enjoy it, chances are we will too.
Thanks, Chris. So Molly, maybe I'll direct this next one at you. Should I choose a piece that is really technical or showy, or something more simple or lyrical?
Oh, well, I think that sort of relates to what we already spoke about. But yeah, I mean, basically, try to choose a piece that you feel really comfortable with, that you know that you can show us the best attributes of how your playing goes. So so by all means, you can play something showy and technical if you really want to show off and show what you can do. We'd love to hear it. But at the same time, if you feel like you would do better to show us what a beautiful sound you have or what beautiful phrasing you can do, then a slower piece would be absolutely fine as well. And I mean, ideally, I suppose on the panel, we're looking for something that's kind of a nice mixture of the two, but you know, you can't have everything. So just choose something that you feel like you can show your best qualities of.
Excellent. So the next question, the instructions say my piece can be up to 5 minutes long, but what if the piece I want to play is longer than 5 minutes? Chris, do you have some advice on that?
Yeah, I think probably if it's a live audition we're talking about, you can come in and say, look, I've got the whole first movement of this sonata or this piece to play for you. And the panel member may say, oh, look, that's great. Why don't you start from the recapitulation or just the last page, because I really like that. If you're doing a recording and you've got, you know, a 10-minute piece and you're only required to do 5, feel free to put all 10 minutes down there. It may not all get listened to. Or if you just want to put 5 minutes on there, feel free to choose the best 5 minutes. And that might be a couple of minutes at the beginning of the movement, and then you leave a bit out and give us a couple of minutes from the end. It's really your choice. If you leave us a 20-minute piece, I guarantee we probably won't listen to all of it because we'll be here forever. So maybe it's best to pick the best 5 minutes, 5-minute bits of the movement or the piece you want to play.
Thanks, Chris. So this next question, I think, provides quite a nice segue into talking a bit more about the excerpts. So what is more important in the audition? Is it the own choice piece or is it the excerpt? So who wants to take that one?
I'll go first on this one. I'll be very controversial and say your audition is 95% your excerpts and 5% your own choice piece for me, because we are looking for someone to drop into the middle of a symphony orchestra. We're not looking for someone to play the concerto out the front. They usually get appointed through a different different process. So yeah, for me the excerpts are by far the more important bit, and the own choice piece is your opportunity to give us just that little bit extra. But I think because of the programs we run, or that AYO run, is basically symphony orchestra based, we want to know whether you can play the symphony orchestra repertoire for your instrument and show us that you can fit that into the orchestra. So for me, it's very heavily weighted in favour of the excerpts, and I always look forward to hearing 5 minutes of the candidate's personality, which is often what you get with the own choice piece. But the starting point is very definitely the excerpts.
I think that you definitely have to bear in mind that the excerpts are incredibly important for the string players as well, and that quite often a good audition is shown when the person has really prepared their excerpts to the best of their ability. And even if they do their solo piece maybe not as well as they would have liked to do, but they come in and they play the excerpts really well because they've worked really hard at it with their teacher, or they've just gotten all the articulation and dynamics and everything pretty good, then that is actually, in a way, it's a better audition for some panelists, definitely. But at the same time, yeah, don't neglect your solo piece, because that's your calling card, and that's the way for you to get comfortable in the audition, to show us what you can do. And also, if you're a string player, it may or may not determine if you can show how much of a soloistic solo player you can be.
Great. All right, so on that note, let's move on to talk a bit more about the excerpts in some detail. So Tim, how can you best demonstrate your musical knowledge and skill when you perform an excerpt?
Well, prepare each excerpt thoroughly. They're just taking up from what Chris and Molly have said. And this is a kind of warning for aspiring young professionals too. How often in a professional orchestra do we hear a young player go for a job and they play the solo work very well, and they think, well, the panel will hear that I'm a good player in the solo piece, and I'm not all that familiar with the excerpts, but they'll know I'm a good player. It doesn't work that way at all in a professional audition or in AYO. You've got to prepare the excerpts thoroughly. You need to nail them, and it takes practice and preparation over a long period of time. So you want to play your excerpts convincingly, with authority, with confidence, and somehow make the panel hear that the rest of the orchestra playing with you. And that takes listening to recordings, getting advice from other people, practicing yourself, recording yourself, listening back, self-criticism. It's a long road, but a very rewarding one. The excerpts that panelists choose for all the instruments in the AYO, they're the classic excerpts. You'll come across them over and over and over again as you go through your professional career. So it's a marvelous training for you and your future career, as well as for the audition that's right in front of you.
Yeah, and you should definitely take them to your teacher. Quite often, you know, we hear students come in and they clearly have no concept of how the excerpts should go. Perhaps they haven't listened to enough recordings, perhaps they haven't taken them to their teacher. And your teacher can help you with bowings and fingerings, for string players anyway, that you may be having trouble with. And the other bit of advice would be to practice playing the excerpts through. So, you know, just in order, in whatever order they are, just practice playing them through without stopping, to really get used to that idea of just doing it one take, or if it was a live audition, you know, you would be doing that as well. So it really helps to practice through to friends, to family, to record yourself as well.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's great advice, recording yourself in particular.
Mm.
So in the excerpt pack, as we touched on, we have a set A and a set B. So set A consists of 4 excerpts, which all applicants need to prepare. And set B is for those applying for our higher level programs. So Chris, could you provide some advice on how an applicant should choose which set of excerpts they should prepare for the audition?
I think the basic way you decide that is to look at your stage of progression, how good you are on your particular instrument. If you're in high school and you're applying, you know, for the Young Symphonist program, it's probably not worth doing the set B excerpts. If you're further up the system, if you're at university and of course you want to go to camp or AYO, then you need to do the whole lot. So the first is just look at how far you are along the journey. Talk to your teacher and say, is it worth doing these 2 extra excerpts? They are, of course, usually very tricky excerpts. When we set them, there are 4 standard excerpts and 2 that are quite demanding, probably you're not doing yourself any good if you go in there and totally annihilate the 2 more difficult excerpts. I was one of those candidates when I was a student. I would always play everything, similar to the E flat and bass clarinet agony that I put some people on the panel through 30 years ago. I'm sure I've probably played the Firebird excerpt on the clarinet when I shouldn't have, long before I was actually ready to do it. But have a talk to your teacher. That's a really good starting point. Look at what programs you are likely to be in the running to get into and make the decision that way.
All right. Thanks, Chris. So the next one's on recordings. How do you filter through and choose which recordings to listen to when you're preparing? So Tim, maybe would you recommend, you know, maybe some more current recordings, or are some of the old school ones okay? What do you think about that?
Well, new or old, there are good ones to be found everywhere, but you don't want to be misled by recordings that have odd tempi or quirks in them. So listen to a bunch of recordings, go for major orchestras and known conductors. You're more likely to have a standard approach there rather than on an obscure orchestra or an obscure conductor. And if in doubt, get advice, play them to your teacher or get your teacher's advice, or seek out experienced players. Everyone going for an audition with AYO will know more experienced players, people they can go to for advice on tempi.
Thanks, Tim. We've had a question come through the chat for Molly. Do markers look at what bowings and fingerings the players use? Is that something that's taken into account?
Not terribly. I mean, it really, you know, that can be quite a subjective thing depending on which orchestra you're playing with and who your principal cellist or who your principal violinist is. So what we're looking for probably is sort of a standard bowing or fingering that you know someone might use, but the reason why is because it shows you to the best of your ability on that excerpt. So yeah, you don't have to do a fingering or bowing the certain way if it doesn't work for you, but take the suggestion as it comes and take it to your teacher, because your teacher will be able to help you figure out the best fingering and the best bowing that will work for you in that situation. And also don't forget, you're just playing the excerpts by yourself and you're not with the whole orchestra, you're not with all the other string players. So you know, you can go with a little bit of leeway there and do what works best for you and what makes you sound at your best.
Brilliant. Thanks, Molly. Can I do each excerpt in a separate take? So no, your excerpts must be recorded in one continuous take, and also they need to be performed in the order that they are presented in the audition pack. So this is just so that we can try and replicate the real life audition scenario as much as possible. Just to note also, the own choice work should be in a separate recording to your excerpts. And if you're auditioning on an auxiliary wind instrument, then each of those instruments should also be in a separate recording too. All right, so I think we might move on to a few good questions we've received just on preparation in general. And also just to note, there will be another webinar in 2 weeks' time on the 26th of August, which will deal specifically with the recording process and how to optimize your recording product. So more of the questions that deal with the kind of technical side of things will be answered then. All right, another one for Molly. Do you recommend playing from memory in the audition?
Well, I think that's a very personal decision. I mean, it's definitely not necessary in the audition. You don't have to play from memory, but if you're used to playing from memory, then, and you enjoy playing from memory, you feel like you play better when you play from memory, then play from memory. However, having said that, I probably wouldn't do the excerpts from memory. I would just do the solo piece from memory. The excerpts, you know, you won't be doing them from memory when you're playing in the orchestra. And actually there might be a lot of articulation and dynamics that you have to keep a close eye on. So don't worry about memorizing the excerpts at all. But yes, if you want to do the solo piece from memory, go for it, but you don't have to, it's up to you.
Brilliant, thanks Molly. So now recorded auditions are obviously quite a bit different to real life scenarios. So you have the control over how many takes you want to do, which can be a blessing or it maybe can be a bit of a curse. So Tim, how do you know when a recording is ready to submit? Do you have any tips on how to stop obsessing over the details and doing countless recordings?
Yes, look, I think there's a huge common pitfall in this area that students spend ages practicing their auditions to make them sound great live, but they tend not to spend enough time getting a good sound, a good volume and a good vision. So the second half of a recorded audition is how good it sounds on the video. They tend to leave aside. So sounding good live is quite different from sounding good in the video. So my suggestion, number one, listen out for the recording webinar that's on in a week or so's time. Figure out how you can get a good sound and real dynamics, not compressed in your recording. Start videoing at least a week before you plan to do the actual recording, so you can watch yourself and listen to yourself. And each time you do it, every day you do it with the microphone in better placement. You're improving it every day, just like you do with your actual preparation. Keep experimenting with the recording placement and the sound until you're happy with it. Give yourself time over a few days to do the recording. Imagine the pressure if you think, well, I have to do it in the next hour and a half so I can squeeze in 6 takes. Well, you don't want to be in that position. You want to have, say, 2 or 3 days where you can have a relaxed time doing it. So the pressure's off and you've got a number of recordings to choose from. And then last bit of advice, you have to do it all in one take. So my suggestion is, hit record, start playing, and if you're happy with how you're going through the first 4 excerpts, keep going and keep your confidence up and keep that recording to choose from later. But if something goes significantly wrong in the first 4 excerpts, we'll just stop and restart. And hopefully if you do that over a few days, you'll have half a dozen recordings to choose from, and listen to them as if you're a panelist. Which recording would appeal to me? Which one would I like? Maybe show it to your teacher or a couple of friends. Which one stands out to them? That's my thoughts.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tim. So I think it would be really good to hear maybe from all of you on this last one before we move to some questions we've received tonight. Just given what we as musicians are all going through in the current COVID situation, do you have any tips for how to maintain discipline and practice regularly when you're struggling with motivation? Who wants to? Chris, do you want to go first?
Yeah, before we started the webinar tonight, the panel were just discussing, and I did mention that one of the things I was trying to do was remember where I have left my clarinets. Of course, Sydney is in lockdown at the moment, and the SSO is unfortunately stuck not doing anything either. And for most of us, we went through some sort of thing last year. If you live in Melbourne, you've probably done it 6 times now, but it is a very, very difficult thing to stay motivated when you can't get out of your house, you can't play chamber music, you can't have a lesson in person. And I think mental health is something that we really need to focus on. So whatever is good for your mental health, I find some quiet meditation really useful. exercise and eating well, all those sorts of things. So you're actually putting your body in the best frame of mind and physical condition. And then I'm much more likely to go, and I do know where my clarinets are, they're just over there, and open the case and practice my notes I can shadow, or as I have been doing every now and again, is actually looking at what I was going to be playing this week, and maybe have a bit of a bash through something, or maybe look at what was coming up next week but has now been cancelled. So try and get into routines, try and keep positive. I think one of the most important things about COVID is to remember that our industry will survive this COVID situation, and although we cannot play together and we can't have audiences in some cities at the moment, again, Tim was saying actually before we started today, it is amazing how when you do get back to playing public performances, how our audiences have flocked back to see live music. They want to come and see you play, and the industry will survive. The only thing that may change is perhaps some of the bums on seats. Some players may not decide that they are going to stay there after this gets back, but the industry will survive. There will be jobs for all of you in a year's time, 2 years' time, whenever the normal audition process starts up again with all the major orchestras, and to try and be as positive and look at what is not right in front of us at the moment, but what is over the horizon. I imagine, and I'm no medical expert, but I imagine COVID will become something like the flu. Everyone will get a vaccine every year, and we will go and do concerts and go back to most of our lives as normal, and we will tour. The airlines and the borders will all open, and we may even be able to get into Perth. You never know. So I think, sorry, little dig there. So I think to be as positive as you possibly can, physically and mentally look after yourself, and remember, it is just a little transient thing that we're going through at the moment. It's not a little thing. I know it's a big thing. And yeah, there will still be a symphony orchestra environment and career path and concerts for our audiences when we come out of this. It's very important to remember that.
Wow. I think it's also really important in terms of I think when you're in lockdown, I think it really, really helps to have little goals every day. So not just thinking about the bigger picture and that, what's going to happen in 1 or 2 years' time, but if you can just give yourself some goals in terms of practice as well, in order to keep your practicing up, you think, well, what can I do? Well, do an AYO audition, or, learn a new concerto, or just learn something and then make a recording of it and send it to, someone in WA. Send it to somewhere else. But I just think it really helps to kind of slow down when you can't go anywhere anyway, and you just have to do, little things at a time. So for your mental health as well, absolutely. Getting out and doing exercise and all that, but also for your practice and for getting to know your instrument, just have little goals that you can set yourself, even if it's just, disciplining yourself every day to play 10 minutes of scales, or 10 minutes of, looking at an excerpt. The excerpts are great for practicing during lockdown because they're, little small bites that you can just really get stuck into, and then, work them up and send them to your teacher, send them to your friends, and just work on them.
Yeah, such wise words, Molly and Chris. My suggestions: take some time to learn some new skills. If you can't be out making concerts, figure out how to video record yourself with high quality microphones. Create some music, write some music, build your website, create a social media presence. It's, while we're downing tools in a way, it's an opportunity for you to build other aspects of your performance. And with social media being such an increasingly important part of professional musicians' future, there's a lot of opportunities to have a presence there. Learn new music. It might be new pieces of music, or like my friend Ian Cleworth, superstar percussionist, is going through his LP collection every day with a cup of coffee and listening to it. And this is stuff that in the normal churn of things you don't have time to do. So he's disciplined himself to do that, and he's re-enjoying and exploring new beauty in that way. one LP at a time. Just think that every minute of time that you put in during this lockdown period on your excerpts is valuable to your future. It's not just valuable for this audition, because these are standard excerpts. You'll encounter them all the time in the future. And the concepts of playing in tune at a good tempo in a convincing way with beautiful phrasing, that's what your future for the next 40 or 50 years is all about. So every minute of time you put in now is good. And then to pick up on something Chris spoke about, what are we in the business of doing? It's creating beautiful and meaningful things on the stage and sharing it with other people. That exists now on the net, and it will exist physically in the future. And our society is desperate for that. We know it. As soon as they've got the opportunity to come back to concerts, they're there. Never has our world or our society more needed the sense of community and a sense of belief in beauty and goodness than today. And that's that's our role in society. That's what musicians do. So keep at it, everyone.
Very well said, all three of you. Thank you so much. So we're running out of time, but we'll just take 2 or 3 questions we've received from the applicants tonight. So the first question is, can I have an accompanist for my own choice piece? So the answer to that, unfortunately, is no. Please do not record with an accompanist. This is one way that we standardise the auditions and ensure as many variables of the auditions are all controlled in uniform. If you do submit a recording with an accompanist, we will need to ask you to record that again. Could you please comment on the suitability in general of a sonata movement for an audition? For example, a late romantic or an early 20th century string sonata, given the key role of the piano in a sonata. So Molly, maybe as a string representative, do you have any thoughts on whether choosing a sonata, or I suppose any piece intended with accompaniment, is a good idea for a solo?
I think it's absolutely fine. I mean, in that situation, no one is going to have an accompanist, right? So whether you're playing solo Bach or movement of a concerto or a sonata, doesn't really matter. Everyone's on the same footing. So if you want to play a sonata, go for it. And just try to choose something that you think will show us, what you can do with that particular bit of the sonata that you're playing. So yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Molly. Another one we got was, do we need to announce the name of our solo piece? Yes, please. There is some more detailed information about what to announce in the audition information pack, and that's available in the portal under the My Auditions tab. So maybe just one more. Do you have any tips for making excerpts sound more exciting rather than like an exercise? So panelists, what do we think about that?
Oh, yes, actually, yes, I think I've got one. You can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Now, when you get ready to record or play a concert, we all get the butterflies in the tummy. We can think, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling nervous, my hands are shaking, and you can tend to think these are bad things. But if you rename them, rebadge them, and don't think I'm feeling really anxious, you think I'm feeling really excited about this. My body is buzzing with energy for this concert. I'm filled with anticipation. You've just rebadged, renamed things that we generally think of as bad. And then you can think, well, my body is filled with energy. I am buzzing with energy. You can pour that into the dynamics and the energy and the dynamism and the conviction of your excerpt. You kind of solve 2 problems with 1. Just by rebadging them and then pouring that energy in a specific direction.
That's
great.
Really great. Very nicely said. Yeah.
Alrighty. On that note, I think as it's 7:50, I think we better bring tonight's webinar to a close, unfortunately. So thank you again for everyone for tuning in this evening and for all your questions. Those of you who submitted questions that didn't get answered, you will be contacted via email about those. And if anyone does still have further questions about applying for AYO in 2022, then please get in touch with us by email at info@ayo.com.au or by giving us a call on 1300 668 500. Please don't forget to tune in next Wednesday, the 18th of August at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time for our next webinar, where we will be joined by another expert panel to discuss the AYO Arts Administration courses and how to ace your applications for those programs. And finally, just a massive thank you to our 3 panelists, Molly, Chris and Tim, for joining us this evening. It's been really fun unpacking the auditions process with you 3, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eliza.
Thank you for having us.
Great
Thanks,
to see you
everyone.
all.
Good luck.
So that's all from us. Have a great evening, and we wish you all the very best with preparing for your auditions. So bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.